And the evening will run like this, so I will shortly introduce our speakers, and then I'm going to hand over to Flight Free UK's director, Anna, who will be leading a discussion. We will put aside some time at the end for questions. Feel free to put them in the chat throughout so they don't get forgotten. So I'm going to introduce our speakers now, before I hand over to Anna for the discussion. So I'll introduce Dominic Winter, who's from Protect Our Winters UK.
Hello.
Dom, if you'd like a couple of minutes to introduce yourself.
Yes, my background's in sustainability, and I now work as head of advocacy for a charity called Protect Our Winters, and the UK chapter of that. So I didn't found it, just a fluke of my name. And yeah, we work to help the outdoor sports communities lead on climate action. So from snow sports to mountain biking and climbing, sort of can be climate advocates in waiting because the impacts are hitting those sports hard already. And yeah, background in master engineering and sustainability, corporate management, and working with some brands. That's it.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Dom. Next up, we have Sarah, who is joining us from Flixbus. Sarah Bartlett.
Hi everyone. Hi, I'm Sarah. I head up communications for Flixbus in the UK. I've been doing that for nearly 4 years. So I'm hoping that some of you have used Flixbus in the past. If not, I want to encourage you to try it by the end of tonight. So what we say is we drive sustainable and affordable travel for everyone, everywhere. So very much kind of relevant to tonight's discussion. So Flixbus started in Germany as a startup. It now
Well, hopefully, don't.
it now is across Europe, and started international services between London and continental cities like Paris and Amsterdam in 2016, and then we've been in the UK domestically for nearly 5 years. So we have 80 destinations across the UK, but that's part of thousands of destinations worldwide. So we were in 45 countries. We own Greyhound in the US, which is obviously a very iconic coach brand. We're in Canada, Australia, India, South America, and we are just essentially a sustainable and affordable way to go. We also have trains in Germany, which is a sort of nice addition to the kind of sustainable package that we offer, and can go into all of that in a bit more detail.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. Big fan of Flixbus over here. And last but not least, we have Dan joining us from Route Zero. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Good evening, everybody. My name's Dan. I'm one of the co-founders at Route Zero. Route Zero was formed to try to counter the climate crisis. Travel and transport is the largest source of emissions for half the countries on Earth. And Route Zero tries to make it as easy to find a low carbon journey as taking your car keys out of your pocket. And we do that for large companies, government organizations, universities, where we significantly reduce their emissions in a cost competitive way. Thanks, it's great to be here.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And thanks to our speakers for joining us tonight. So I'll now hand over to Anna, Flight Free UK's director, who's going to lead a discussion about these topics.
Thank you, Maddie. Just making sure I've got my slides showing. So yes, I'm Anna, the director of Flight Free UK, and as Maddie explained, we're a charity that encourages people to travel without flying. One of the things we do is look at the barriers to why people choose flights over other means. And one of those barriers, as you can well imagine, is cost. So we know that people choose often the most cheap option, which is extremely understandable. And often that is the flight, or it appears to be the flight. So this evening's event is looking at why flights can be so cheap, but also how in some circumstances they're actually not when you look at the overall price. So yes, we're going to come to that in a second, but just to give you a little bit of info, obviously Flight Free UK, we're online. You've just seen the links for everybody, every one of our speakers, and we'll show you those again at the end. So if you want to follow up with anyone here, then please search for them online. The stuff that Sarah and Dom and Dan are sharing with us this evening is extremely valuable, and we want you to follow up with their companies. So please, in fact, chance to kind of plug your products, because I know, Dom, you've got a petition at the moment out, and I'm sure Dan and Sarah, you want people to have a look at your products as well. So we'll make sure we spend some time doing that at the very end. But yeah, I'm going to just outline the topics that we'll be speaking about, because as I've just alluded to, flights are in many cases the cheapest option. That's what encourages us to choose them, but that's not always the case. So our discussion now is going to look at these few focused topics. Why is flying so cheap? What the true cost of flying actually is in terms of practical applications, but also environmental considerations. We'll look at some real life examples of when flying is not the cheapest option, even though it seems to be or might seem to be. And then we've got some budget tips for flight-free travel. So that's what we'll be going through over the next half hour or so. And as Maddie said at the beginning, if you have any questions at any time, you can just pop them in the chat. Maddie's monitoring the chat box. So when we finished our panel discussion, we will be moving on to questions from you all here. And if you have something that just comes to mind, just put it in the chat and we will see if we can address those questions directly. So first question then. Oh, hang on. Sorry, my clicker. Next slide, please. So yeah, why is flying so cheap? There are quite a few reasons, but the fundamental reason is that there is no tax on airline fuel. And that is a fact that surprises most people when they hear it. I am sure that some of you at this event already know that, because we talk about it quite a lot at Flight Free UK. But if you didn't know that, that is the reality. There is no tax on airline fuel. That is as a result of an international agreement which came about in the 40s when the aviation industry was a fledgling business. And it's to do with the complexities of taxing transport. So when you fill up your car, for example, 50% of what you pay is tax. It's very easy to tax fuel that you put in your petrol tank. The problem with airline fuel is that the argument came, do we tax the fuel in the country that the airline refills in? Do we tax the fuel in the country that the aircraft lands in? Do we tax it in the countries, the multiple countries sometimes that the aircraft is flying over in the airspace? And this was deemed too complicated in the 1940s to come to a conclusion. And so the conclusion was, well, let's just not tax it then. In terms of context, the airline industry at the time was extremely small. So this didn't necessarily present a problem. But since then, the airline industry has grown huge, it's boomed. And now, because flights are now so intrinsically part of many of our travel conversation and practicalities, it's become far too complicated. I mean, if it was complicated back in the 40s, it is much more complicated now to then start introducing taxes. But most importantly, it's very politically unpopular. So if you were to be the politician who said, we're going to make flying more expensive, you would, by introducing taxes, you would not be a very popular politician. Now, there are some countries that tax their internal flights. A few countries across Europe do that, which is a really easy decision because you don't have to think about the airspace and the country of takeoff and landing because they are the same. So that some countries have decided to do as an environmental, a reflection on the environmental cost of the travel. But we haven't decided to do that here in the UK. There is also talk of an EU-wide tax, which is being every so often that's tabled at EU level, and that may or may not be something that happens in the near or far future, but it's part of the conversation, at least in some quarters. So that's a very quick précis on why flights can potentially be so cheap. There is a tax on flying, and that's APD. You might have heard of that, air passenger duty, and that's added depending on how far you're flying. So short flights, domestic flights is low, the longer haul flights and private jets and such are higher. But yeah, so that's kind of the picture of those tax taxation situation. And as a result, many airlines, well, I suppose not as a result, but in reality, many airlines actually operate at a loss or very, very narrow margins. And we saw during COVID, a couple of airlines, even at the very beginning, just completely went bust. So once people stop traveling even a little bit, then some airlines will, their margins are just so small, they won't be able to operate. So yeah, that's the reality. The situation with no tax, but also the margins being so tiny that they're kind of operating on an extremely small budget. Okay, so we're going to, sorry, I'm flicking between some slides here. I do apologize. Right, so let's think about the true cost of flying then, and we'll just come to our panelists in a second. I'll just introduce this part of the evening. Is flying really that cheap? So if we look at the true cost of flying, and there was a study by which looked at certain airlines to see if the cost of the ticket was actually the cost of the journey, and they found out that in most cases, about half of the cost in total was from extras that you were adding. So I'm just going to read this out. And then after this, Dom, you mentioned a study by Greenpeace. So we'll come to you in a second just to illustrate that as well. But yeah, so we're looking here. So this was from October 2024, which did so this is the consumer guide, which question mark. So they did a study on how the cost of flights kind of is distributed and what the reality is. So, for example, a Wizz Air flight from London Luton to Lyon costs £29. So that's the headline price. But once you've added the baggage, the seat cost, it's 124. This particular one was £124 per person. So that was an extreme increase in the price. And they looked at ultra low cost flights across the budget carriers, which includes EasyJet, Ryanair, and Wizz Air. And they found that in some cases a flight would cost 4 times more than the headline fees once the fees for seat selection and a cabin bag were added, which would potentially add hundreds of pounds if you were booking for a family. And then if you're looking at putting luggage in the hold, then that would be even more substantial. So this is just looking at cabin baggage, so a carry-on piece of luggage. So that's often the picture. Airlines will have a headline price, which is very frequently a very low price. So at one point, budget airlines especially got wind of the kind of benefit of stripping back absolutely everything and just offering the most basic price they could, which reels you in as a consumer. And then once you've kind of committed to the idea that you're going to be taking this flight, then you're adding everything on the way. And as you've just heard, it can definitely double, maybe even triple the price. So Dom, you have a bit of knowledge on this from a study that Greenpeace did, which showed something very similar. So do you have anything to add there?
Yes, and I guess there's also just from personal experience, I've gone to Doubt probably like 10 times without flying, to South France a couple of times, Germany and Austria a few times, even Sweden. And so, yeah, I'll get into those experiences a bit more too. But I think the Greenpeace was an interesting example because they didn't include those additional costs on the flying. And so there were some instances where the train was cheaper, particularly London to Brussels and the domestic routes. It showed it being that the train could be more expensive on some of those other routes, but like internationally. But what it wasn't doing was including coach options. And as I say, it wasn't really including the actual practicalities of traveling through an airport, which is where so many of the costs come in, as you say. So I think it was sort of put together from a lobbying perspective to try and push there to be progress on reducing reducing the costs. And my experience is, yeah, definitely particularly into certain types of destination, like the ones I'm going to for these sports, like you can definitely do it cheaper without flying because of where you end up going by flight and the transfers. But yeah, I'll give others a chance to chip in before I get into the detail of that, perhaps.
Dan, can you add because you work with businesses primarily and advise them and give them the information for which transport option they should pick. So do you find that when people work with you and come to book their particular journey, that overall the cost is higher than expected if they're looking at flights, and how does that compare?
I think it's a bit of a different landscape with business flights because there isn't so much this kind of leading consumer low price. Typically, we'd find it's very route and ticket dependent across the board, particularly on cross-border routes in Europe. Flying can be cheaper than train travel. We see that for our customers, they can get on a train in about 40% of cases and it'd be cost equivalent or cheaper. So yeah, it's very route dependent.
What are the so that's a really interesting statistic. 40% of your customers find that the train is cheaper or equal. Is there like a broad kind of impression of where those journeys are? So is that more the near journeys, or are you looking at further journeys across Europe? Do you have a picture of that?
Yeah, it's very dependent on how far in advance the users book, on particular routes. Intercity journeys can be very expensive cross-border in Europe. So what we try to do at Route Zero is give users real-time information. So they can be looking for a route from door to door, and we can tell them exactly what the pricing is across different modes. And that way we don't need to generalize because we can flash up a really convenient, low cost, super low emission journey if one's available.
And you say that in 40% of cases it is. Does that surprise people? Because in general, we kind of believe that flying is always cheaper. So is that a surprising outcome for your customers or even for you?
It can be. And also, different people are attuned to different modes of travel depending on what they tend to do. So some people really love the productivity benefits that they can get by taking a longer train journey, whereas others perhaps are used to, getting to the airport and traveling by train, and so there's a bit of resistance. So we need to try and overcome that and help users find the best journey for them.
Yeah. And Sarah, can we bring you in here because as an operator that you do point to point travel, whereas when you're flying it involves transfers. So do you have some extra insight here in terms of all the extras that you're looking at when you fly, but that you don't have that when you're looking at ground travel and specifically coach travel?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel that, I mean, not to completely plug fix us, but then talking about all of these things, you've got a main piece of luggage and a carry-on included in your ticket price. There's nothing hidden there. As you just mentioned, you've got that city to city, point to point thing. So you don't have that extra thing of going to the airport and then finding onward travel, which can, airports can often be way outside of the place you actually want to be. There's the other aspect, which is sometimes forgotten, which is when you are traveling by coach, yes, often longer, but actually, if you choose to go overnight, for example, you can take that as your sort of accommodation for the night. And so you can go to sleep in London, wake up in Paris, and then you don't have the added expense of the accommodation. So there's an added kind of cost benefit there that is maybe not even kind of considered. And I think it's interesting we're talking about whether what people kind of want to do or they perceive as being like the norm. I think coach travel often gets forgotten in these discussions. So really pleased to be here to kind of represent that. I think there's a bit of a perception that, a lot of people tend to took coaches as students and, it's kind of old, it's uncomfortable. we're really trying our best to kind of turn that around. It's a modern experience. It's comfortable. It's very easy. All of those things kind of that actually mean that it's possibly a nicer experience than traveling by plane, as well as, of course, being cheaper.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, and we'll definitely talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the event as well, because you're right. It is, we want to get value for our money, don't we? And if we're prepared to sit in a tiny tube like a sardine, then you might not enjoy it very much. Coming back to this study by Which, it looked specifically at what you might expect. It looked at things like the baggage, things like the transfers. But there's another big one, which is let's say you want to take food with you. You can't do that when you fly. You have to buy what's in the airport, which is going to be overpriced. And that's not a cynical statement. That's what happens in an airport. So being able to take things with you from your home location really helps to overall bring the budget down of your overall travel. So I'm sure that you as well, Sarah, find that with customers bringing picnics in their carry-on luggage and everything else. So just to kind of conclude on this, what this study that Which was doing, the idea behind it was to campaign for airlines not to be able to offer that very, very stripped back price, but to give consumers a more clear idea of what the total cost of their travel would be. And from a Which point of view, that was because it was misleading the consumer. So from their point of view, it's about giving the consumer the upfront information as it should be, so they can make an informed choice. But that would help us from our point of view as well, because it means that the prices would level out somewhat. So we would have a bit more of a level playing field in terms of comparison. So you're not so much put off by a high price of traveling over land compared to an extremely low price on a flight. So yeah, I don't know if Dan or Dom or Sarah have any kind of experience in that in your work that you might just want to add there, or should we move on to the next point? Okay, nothing to add, that's fine. So it says as well on our slide that we need to also take account of the environmental cost of flying. So I'll just briefly touch on this because, of course, this event is about budget travel. So that's why we're all really here, to find out how to travel cheaply. But we can't forget the environmental cost of flying. So what we would like to see at Flight Free UK is all travel, the cost of all travel to reflect its environmental cost. So if we are looking at a typical journey across Europe from A to B by coach, for example, estimates show that you're looking at 6 times a 6 times lower carbon emissions that in general. And we'll probably come to you, Sarah, if you've got some specific stats on that for later. And by train, it's roughly 10 times lower in price. Can you imagine how much our behaviour would be influenced if the train were 10 times cheaper than the air travel? That's obviously an unrealistic prospect because there are so many other things that come into play here. But if we're looking at the environmental cost of travel, that broadly gives us a structure within which we can have a realistic cost in terms of the price cost of our flights to the climate. So let's move on to our next point, which is real. Oh, sorry. Yes, please do. Yes.
Yeah, so in the environmental side, yeah, like definitely it's 80 to 90% lower to be going by things like rail than flying. And an interesting perspective of calculating that is that social cost of carbon method. And there's such wide-ranging like disagreement about what that social cost of carbon is, and there keeps being new studies suggesting it should be higher that would make it like even a bigger difference than what you're just saying, Anna. So yeah, like the UK government says it's £273 per ton of carbon dioxide that we emit into the air. Some studies are suggesting it should be $1,500, or University of Chicago said that over the real long term it's $100,000 because this still can destroy our entire economy. And going like to and from Europe, you're taking quite a large chunk of a ton. So yeah, definitely. Like once you factor that in, it is that environmental cost is can be huge. So
Thank you, Dom. Yeah, no, it's brilliant to have those specific examples. So thanks for adding that information. You're absolutely right. Looking at the environmental cost is much, much higher, especially when you add that social cost as well. Thank you. Okay, so real life examples of when flying is not cheaper. So I looked up a couple of examples, and this is fresh information that I looked up today. So the most busy, looking at domestic travel first, the busiest air route in the UK is London to Edinburgh or Edinburgh to London. So I looked at if you were to have a meeting in Edinburgh tomorrow and you wanted to go up there, or vice versa, if you're in Edinburgh, you have a meeting in London, booking now for tomorrow, a rail return was £183.90, which leaves from the capital at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then you're arriving at lunchtime, and then you can leave again at 7 p.m. and then get home at midnight. So that's for a day meeting or an afternoon meeting in Edinburgh. The cheapest flight for tomorrow is £103. So you're leaving, the flight is at 8:25, but of course you have to be at the airport much, much earlier than that. So you arrive in the Scottish capital a bit earlier than otherwise you would by train, but you can leave earlier as well. So all in all, you've got the same amount of time for your meeting, just at a different time of day. Depending on how you're getting to the airport, so that's the tricky thing, because you're not going to start in central London necessarily. And with the train, you might have to get to central London to start with. So there's always that factor that we need to consider. But the thing that you won't be doing is having your meeting at the airport in Edinburgh. So getting into the town centre, the city centre, is an extra £12, I'm sorry. So yeah, you're looking at £115 for your cheapest version of a flight, which when compared to 183 by train, actually the difference is not that high. So that's quite a good example of last minute travel. We're always thinking about those. That often is the argument. But what if you need to do this last minute? Isn't it much more expensive by train? Well, actually, no. Last minute flights are also quite costly. Okay, so let's think about when you have a bit more time and you might want to plan something. And of course, we don't all live in London, so let's do a different scenario. Let's say I live in Leeds and I want to go to Amsterdam for the weekend. So I just looked it up for the first weekend in March. By air, you are looking at £202. That's the cheapest one that's available right now for a weekend in Amsterdam, flying from Leeds Bradford Airport. Including a transfer to Leeds Bradford Airport, I haven't included that because, again, we don't know. You might get a lift there, you might get the bus, you might park, but then parking is an extra charge, all of those things. But we do know that your transfer, because you're not going to just enjoy Schiphol Airport for the weekend, you will want to go to Amsterdam Central Station. So that costs £10 return. So that is £212 for your minimum for your weekend in Amsterdam from Leeds. By train, that same weekend, to get from the Eurostar to Amsterdam is £110, so that's quite high. But the other trains are actually really cheap. So you can get, at the time specified, from Leeds to London for £28.60, which is £57.20 your return. And then you arrive, of course, in central Amsterdam, so you don't need an extra transfer, which adds up to £206.20. That is overall cheaper than your flight plus transfer into Amsterdam Central. So I found a super, super cheap fare for a return train from Amsterdam to London, which was £39. So Eurostar, and this is not a lie, Eurostar starts at £39, and that fare is available for early March. Now, here's a caveat. It's not available on the Sunday that I might want to fly back. So if I were to have a weekend in Amsterdam by train, I would need to stay until the Monday or the Tuesday to get back at that price. And those are the decisions we make. So when we're talking about holidays, we can make those decisions. You can have a quick weekend in and out with Amsterdam by air, or you can take an extra couple of days, get a better price, and have a little bit of a longer holiday. So these, so the fares are there. It means we might have to rearrange our plans slightly, but those are the decisions that we're making when we're looking at those journeys. I know Dom hinted at this as well, that you had some real life examples of when you have travelled without flying and it's been cheaper. Dan, do you have any as well? I know we kind of looked at what your customers have said to you, but do you have some specific ones where you've looked at the prices side by side and the flight is not the cheaper option?
Yeah, I really like your example of the London-Edinburgh route. It's a very busy route for lots of our customers. And I'll put a link in the chat in just a minute. But what we try to do is make that
Sí,
decision
la
process.
letra Kurfmassima, por favor.
Sorry, carry on, Dan.
That's right.
Oh no, I've muted you. Oh no, hang on, I've done that wrong.
No, don't worry. I'm back. Yeah, I was just saying I like the route. London to Edinburgh is a really big, busy one for our customers as well. What's challenging is there's a lot of numbers to crunch. You know, I liked the analysis that you presented. And so the difficult part is figuring out, okay, I want to know time, cost, and carbon, different modes all compared. So I'm going to stick a link in the chat, which basically does exactly what you were talking about with that route, Edinburgh to London, and our customers are able to find journeys which are quicker by train, cheaper by train, and around 90% lower emission. In fact, some of our customers even go first class and they're cheaper, lower emission and faster. So yeah, great example.
That's good to know. Everyone likes a first class upgrade. Thanks, Dan. So Dom, you go, and Sarah, we're going to come to you after that because I know that you'll have plenty of examples where not flying is cheaper. Go for it, Dom.
Perfect. Yes. So generally, I just had a look at going to sort of Bogs and Rees, classic Alps ski area, in March and April, and you can still do that for around £120 each way. I find generally when I've done it, that I was just looking back at my notes from previous trips, that's generally what it's cost me, like around £100 each way. And the great thing with that is it includes baggage. So like especially if you're going to carry with like snowboards, it'll cost you. You can spend, I don't know, haven't done it over a while, 50, 60 quid probably on a snowboard bag, something like that. Then like that. Then once you fly, like the ticket cost, there are some really cheap looking ticket costs to that area. Like sort of £30. But yeah, if you add on a bag, you're spending 60 quid each way. If you add on a transfer at the far end, transfer from like Grenoble Airport up to a French Alp resort, you can spend £100 on the transfer, and that's practically the entire journey from London. You can have to be a bit wary of that journey to London. You can do that on a coach to make that cheaper, or just make sure you book that at the same time you book it all in advance. Like so much of what we're talking about depends when you book it, and that's what makes it so hard when we're like compiling reports on this, is to doing a fair comparison, because if you book a plane, book it just at the right moment, you can get these methods, low carbon methods, really, really cheap. So yeah, generally that's the sort of cost I've been looking at down to there. Certainly less than that, probably to the southwest as well. So yeah, it's not hugely expensive. I have used the coach. Like often it's the Eurostar at leg that spikes up if you're suddenly seeing really expensive legs. Those like French trains stay pretty cheap. And even some of the overnight sort of Amsterdam to Austria, you can do that on a seat for sort of, I think, €4, something like this, on a sleeper train, or maybe €80 on the with a bed, a bunk, like a private little bunk thing. And I mean, that takes you all the way from Amsterdam into sort of Innsbruck and right down into Austria. That's a long distance. But yeah, so it can be done for not too higher cost. But as I was saying, the Eurostar leg tends to be the one that can suddenly spike up. And so I have done journeys where I've taken a train from the French Alps area up to Paris and then switched to a coach. And yeah, handing over to Sarah on that element, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah,
go for it,
I
Sarah.
mean, I think you'd be hard pressed to find much cheaper than coach. We start tickets at £4.49 domestically. So, and I was just looking just now while we were having that conversation, because I don't know all the prices of everywhere off by heart, but London to Edinburgh tickets start from like 29.99, and so obviously a really cheap kind of option. I worked with a Telegraph journalist over Christmas who did a ski trip all by coach, and that cost was £68. So she did London to Paris, and then Paris to La Plan. I hope I'm saying that correctly. So like lots of options, and we do interchange tickets as you would at an airport, where you can get onto a different coach, so the ticket will kind of line up so that you can make those kind of changes. So oftentimes you're kind of doing two legs of the journey in one, very low cost.
Thanks, Sarah. And we'll definitely talk more about that, specifically coach travel as a budget option in a second, because yeah, the budget tips, that's probably the most useful part of this event, and that's what we're going to come to next. Especially trying to avoid like either finding cheap Eurostars or avoiding Eurostar altogether. We all love Eurostar, but it can be the most expensive part of your trip, as Dom has alluded to. But just to kind of make an observation about our behavior. So often, because we have experienced cheap flight prices, and because we see cheap flights advertised a lot, we can often book those without thinking. And as another real life example, last year I went to Lake Como and Milan, and it cost £260 return. This did involve Interrail, and I just saw someone wrote something about Interrail in the chat, and that will be part of our budget tips in a second. But that was the cost of my holiday, £260 to Milan and back. But really, we went to Lake Como, which is a little bit extra, actually. I was speaking to a friend of mine who was, sorry, I'm just gonna, yes, I was speaking to a friend of mine who recently booked tickets to fly to Milan, and it cost £300. And I just thought, my goodness, why did you do that? Because it's actually a lot cheaper to go by train. And the answer is probably because we are so conditioned to fly that we don't think about the other options. Even when the flight is more expensive, we still take it. So that's obviously part of our work here at Flight Free UK, to disrupt that and to try and create that social movement away from flights, so we don't always take them as the default. But that's worth reminding people, and perhaps sharing that even if the flight is not the cheapest option, we still take it, and being able to find those cheaper alternatives will really help in changing the norm when it comes to how we travel. So let's move on to that now and have a look at some of the budget tips for Flight Free travel. So whenever we give budget tips at Flight Free UK, our number one is pretty much always take the coach. So Sarah, do you want to have the floor now and just tell us a little bit more about those practicalities? You've already hinted at some of it, but yeah, sell us coach journeys as an alternative to flying.
That's what I live for. Yeah, I think first and foremost is that you can obviously get your luggage is included. Someone has just asked in the chat, and I was just halfway through replying. So standard piece of luggage and hand luggage included. Special luggage would be extra cost or additional luggage, but it's usually sort of the £5 to £10 mark. So it's much more affordable than flying. Traveling overnight, as I mentioned already. There's free Wi-Fi and charging points on every single coach. So if you want to be productive, as I think was mentioned earlier, there is the opportunity to crack on with some work or watch some TV, whatever you want to do. So it's like a nice kind of comfortable experience that you're enjoying. In terms of kind of tips, it's always best to book in as far in advance as possible. It's always going to be affordable, but typically the further in advance that you book, the cheaper it's going to be. So that's just worth taking a look at. Trying to think if there's anything else that I'm missing aside from traveling overnight, but I think those are my main tips.
So coming from the UK, you obviously, as you say, you do domestic travel, but then you also do those longer European routes. And do you have, like, could you get from somewhere in the UK to like the south of Spain, is in one coach, or is that the kind of thing where you're doing multiple coaches or stop-offs? I imagine you're stopping off regularly to like use the toilet, get some food, maybe stretch legs.
So it depends on where you were going. So, for example, we've got direct coaches to like Lille, to Amsterdam. There's one that goes all the way to Poland, Frankfurt. When I say direct, there may well be one or two stops, as you say, on the way, but you wouldn't necessarily get off the coach. You'd be on one coach. However, I know, for example, for Spain, you would probably change, likely somewhere in France. It just depends on what routes are available, but our booking kind of website is very good at being able to kind of tell you what that route would be, and you wouldn't have to necessarily figure that out for yourself. It will give you an interconnection option. You can also click direct as well if you want to kind of see just direct options.
Okay. And do you see a variety of demographics taking these? Because at the beginning you sort of said, well, coach travel isn't just for students anymore. Is it a wider range of people who are accessing coach travel?
Yeah, people often ask us this, and you know, I think we're a young company, and you know, trying to perpetuate that kind of modern coach image. But actually, when you look at the demographic of the people that use us, it's very split. It's like somewhat surprising, I think, and coach travel actually should be for everyone. And I think that's actually what you see is that I think people who have kind of almost cottoned on to the benefits of traveling by coach. I think when we had a lot of rail strikes a couple of years ago, I think that was a moment when a lot of people sort of took the coach because there was no other option and went, oh, actually, this is pretty good. I'm going to do this again. And so I think that helped us to kind of broaden the demographic of people traveling with us.
Great. And Dan, do you find for the people you work with, is the largest share train travel, I imagine, but do they travel by coach with you?
Yeah, the largest share in the business area, alternative to flights, is trains. Some users take coaches to airports. I know that's not what we're trying to achieve on this call, but it is a convenient connection route.
Does anyone use the coach for a full journey? Do you find that?
I think it's much rarer in the
Okay.
business environment.
Yeah, I
But
can understand that. Yeah.
But it's also quite hard for them to compare that journey. It may well be more convenient, which is really where Route Zero comes in.
Yeah. Okay. Useful to know. Okay, and our second budget tip is to use Interrail. So this is it's a real money saver. So if you are looking at the cheapest version of each of your train tickets, then that will be cheaper than Interrail overall, but it's unlikely that you will get the cheapest version of each rail ticket. So in order to keep the overall cost down, then we always recommend looking at Interrail. Now, Interrail does a sale twice a year, typically in springtime and in autumn time. That's usually 20 or 25% off the pass, which is extremely effective at keeping that cost right down. So, and similar to coach travel, Interrail is not just for students. It used to be, but now anybody can buy an Interrail pass and you get discounts for low ages and high ages. And on top of buying your pass, so if you were to get a 4-day pass, which means you are able to travel for 4 days within a month, so you have 4 travel days within a month. It doesn't mean you have to have a month-long holiday. You can just have a week if you like, or however long it is. But you're entitled to travel 4 days within a month, and you would have to buy seat reservations on top of that. So typical cost if you bought a normal adult Interrail 4-day pass in the sale, it will cost you less than £200. If you add seat reservations to, let's say, one single destination like Berlin or let's say Prague, that's quite a good destination, then you'd be looking at maybe £260 odd, everything included. So that is your return holiday cost all the way to Prague and back, or whichever other European city you've chosen, which is one of the bonuses of that is that you are not paying more in the school holiday. It is a fixed price, so that can really help if you are traveling in school holidays. And children under 11 go free, so that's much older for free travel than if you were to fly. So I think it's age 4 that you start getting charged on a plane. So those are a couple of extra bonus ways to keep the cost down with Interrail. I don't know if any of our contributors have any experience of Interrail and tips that you want to add here, or we can go into the next tip. Nothing to add. Okay, no problem.
I'll go
yes,
back
sorry.
on the previous point about that notion.
Go on, Dom.
Notion it's cheap keeps us flying. There's some interesting research I just pointed to in the chat around that. Around is a lot of habits as much as anything else, and that's why I'm really pleased that some like trip operators are starting to show those alternate routes more for the Eurostar Snow and these sorts of things, as people just get used to seeing it and think about it, and as with that route like more packaged in. Or like shown as they'll help you get the whole route. You don't have to book the leg and work out how to cross Paris because it goes via Lille and these sorts of things. Then hopefully that will like help us culturally shift to this, as it's sort of done with your package. Most people buy a package. But in terms of that, how to find cheap, I think one of the real tricky elements of some of these trips can be the discrepancy in the timing of the release of the Eurostar. Can be sort of more like 6 months in advance, and then the UK and SNCF trains and so on can be more like 3 months. So just like setting notifications in your calendar or keeping an eye on the newsletters of those relevant websites to help you find that information that will tell you in your inbox when they're coming out, and like buy them as soon as they're out is definitely the main one that works for me, or and has kept it cheap when I've been trying to do these trips. And if you're going to interested in going to the Alps, then that Eurostar Snow route is really good. It's like £120 each way, and it really helps you change at Lille in a quick manner. But they release, like, you have to be quick on those. They're selling out so fast. They're only putting on 1 train a year this season, which is ridiculously small. So I'll come back at the end I'll push to increase these sorts of things. But I think that's my tips on that. Some people have talked also about like flights giving you flight points, air miles, these sorts of things, and you can start to get these things with like TrainPal or Uber rewards and LNER and stuff giving you rewards, and split tickets and rail cards have been mentioned and things. So lots of ways to do, but it all takes some learning when you do it the first time. But
thanks, Dom. And so a couple of as you said, the rewards that the rewards that you get from flights, for example, you can get that on Eurostar as well. So they do loyalty scheme, which is good to know.
Mm-hmm.
And as you mentioned, the setting the alerts for when tickets come on sale. Now that's one of the more frustrating things about traveling without flying, isn't it? That you can't book a year in advance. Like I could book a flight for this time next year now, but I can't do that by train. And that's actually one way that an Interrail pass comes into its own, because you have 11 months from when you buy the Interrail pass to use it. So I bought one in November, I won't be using it until September, and that will mean so it doesn't matter how far in advance I then book, the cost is fixed. So that can also really help. Okay, so the next tip is to travel overnight. Sarah, you already mentioned that because you said about overnight Flixbus travel, which removes the need for a hotel. So I'll come back to you in a second, but Dan, do you have clients who do travel overnight? Because this can often make timings more convenient for business trips.
Yeah, it's quite a personal choice, I think, people traveling overnight. But we do have a lot of customers taking the overnight sleeper from Edinburgh. It can be quite expensive, but if you factor in the cost of a hotel that you would otherwise perhaps need to get in London, then it works out as reasonable value for money versus either traveling early in the morning on the train or taking a flight.
Okay, thank you. And let's not forget that flight times are often extremely antisocial. So it's quite nice to be able to wake up refreshed in your destination. And as you say, if you compare it to the cost of a hotel, then it works out quite reasonably. But Sarah, come and sell it to us for sleeping on a coach.
Well, I've done it, so I think one thing that people might be surprised by, I've noticed in the chat, toilets. I mean, it's something I don't usually mention because I sort of think, oh, that's obvious, but actually it's not for people who haven't been on a coach for a while. There are toilets on every coach we've got on our UK network. Sleeping on a coach, what you can do with Flixbus, which is a really nice addition, is pay for the seat next to you for like a nominal fee. That means you can spread out, have a proper sleep. Just needs to be prepared, have a good kind of cushion with you. But I've done it. I've done Edinburgh to London. It's absolutely fine. Woke up in Victoria coach station, fresh as a daisy, ready to go. So it's very doable.
Yeah, I would add for any overnight travel, eye mask, earplugs, something warm.
Absolutely,
Done.
yes.
Okay, so two more specific tips for budget flight-free travel before we go to questions. So we've spoken about how often Eurostar is the most expensive part of getting to your European destination. So specifically to keep costs down on Eurostar, there's the low fare finder on the Eurostar website. And remember that journey I mentioned earlier from Leeds to Amsterdam? One of the legs of the Eurostar was £39 only. And I found that because I used the low fare finder. And what it does, it simply highlights where you have those £39 fares. Often they will be at, as you can imagine, quiet times. So it could be the first Eurostar of the day. It could be something during midweek when there's low demand. So you would have to be a bit flexible, but that's the starting price and they're often available even at the last minute. So even if you look on next week's fares for Eurostar, there will be some £39 available. If you're in London, that's brilliant because you can be extremely flexible when you go. If you're not, you can stay overnight in London at hotels called the Hub hotels, which are a very conveniently located and low price. I think they're run by Premier Inn and they are the lowest price. They're very basic, but they are great for just an overnight stop in a city. And the other thing you can do with Eurostar is use Eurostar Snap, which is a way of getting up to 50% off the price of your ticket but you have to be extremely flexible there as well. So this is not going to work for everyone, but it might work for you. You choose the slot that you want to travel, so the date and either morning or afternoon, and they tell you the day before when your train is going to be. So they basically put you on the cheapest train that's available. So yeah, you do have to be flexible, but that can be a really good bargain weekend somewhere if you are able to be in London. Yeah, not necessarily for everyone. But of course, we can avoid using Eurostar completely by taking the ferry or using the coach. So we have had quite a few questions about ferry travel. And if you are traveling as a foot passenger on a ferry, it is extremely carbon efficient because you're not really taking up much of the demand or the space. And going by ferry can be really budget friendly and carbon friendly method if you're traveling as a foot passenger. And for some of my personal holidays as well, because we've sort of hinted that rail travel or onward travel and coach travel on the continent is super cheap. If you can get across the channel in a cheap way, then you're onto a winner. So I think my last ferry journey cost £30 or something, which is, that's cheaper than Eurostar. So there we go. And also the rail and sail ticket. So that's when your train is grouped together with your ferry cost. And it's Stena Line who offers that, and Irish ferries as well. So if you're going to Dublin, if you're going to... so Dublin is from... well, it can be any station on the West Coast network. It's a single price all the way to Dublin, which is typically £60. Going to the Netherlands, any station, your starting point can be any station on the East Coast network, or East Anglia network, I'm so sorry, and that costs £59 in total. So that is, that's often cheaper than just the rail leg would be. So rail and sail from Stena Line is very useful, and you can find that on Trainline. So those are very specific budget tips, and all of these will be written down and sent to you as a summary after the event. So you'll get that in an email, so you can investigate a bit more if you like. But before we go to questions, do we have any extra budget tips from our contributors that we haven't mentioned yet. So Dan?
Nothing further. I think you've covered them. Thanks, Anna.
Okay. Dom, do you have anything extra?
No, I think that's it on the budget tips. So yeah, thanks.
And Sarah, I guess yours is take the coach.
Yeah, I was going to say one thing that I haven't mentioned yet is that Maddie and I were talking before this, and I think it's on the website now, or if it's not already, hopefully it will be, of a discount code for traveling domestically and internationally for people here, obviously, and then anyone for flight who's sort of looking at Flight Free UK. So an extra kind of affordability point there to for all you lovely people.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Okay, so now on to the question session. So I can see there's huge numbers of comments in the chat, and over to you, Maddie, to lead this section. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. That's such an interesting discussion to hear everyone's views on it. There's been some amazing questions and comments in the chat as well. A couple that really jumped out to me was the question, should all trip or journey operators be obliged to show the carbon cost on the advert and on the ticket itself? I guess a bit like when we're buying food and we see the nutritional values on it, be a similar sort of advertising. So have any views or ideas to bring in there?
Yeah, they probably should. That's kind of what Route Zero allows you to do, right, Dad? Is to see that info, and yeah, the info's there. I mean, there's so many good policy suggestions we can bring in here. We haven't really made it the focus of this event, but like the frequent flyer levy would be a great reform to how we do taxing of flights, for example. So yeah, big recommendation to go and support campaigns pushing for a frequent flyer levy that reforms it. Currently, you pay like a flat amount depending on how far the route is, of as cheap as I think like £6 or £10 or something on a flight. Frequent flyer levy would make it so that the first one might even be free to enable people to take their one holiday if they want to and can't afford it in a more fair way. And then the more flights you take, it gets maybe £40 more expensive every time you fly. So yeah, big shout, frequent flyer levy. But also, yeah, showing the carbon cost would be cool too. And there's certainly something we're starting to put on lots of clothing items across Europe having to do this. So that's why not.
Yeah, that's so right. Yeah, popping up on clothing as well. Someone put that it's coming up soon in Switzerland. I don't know if anyone's aware of any other countries where it's being made an obligation or more mainstream, but definitely something we're hoping to see coming up. We also had another question, but more technical, but talking about the emissions comparisons. Is there a gold standard for calculating or where these organisations go to find out what the numbers are? Don't know if Dan or Dom, you have anything to weigh in there.
Yeah, very happy to. There's a myriad of different emissions methodologies. The UK's DEFRA methodology is still one of the most used, and it's conservative and quite reliable. Route Zero compares all the different journeys using that methodology or another methodology of your choice. So it makes it easy to work out the emissions of one journey versus another.
We also use the DEFRA figures that you've just mentioned, Dan. There are so many different carbon calculators out there. So whichever one you use, it probably is going to say something different. We did quite a lot of research when we started Flight Free UK to see what the outliers were, and then we don't use those. So if they're extremely low or if they're extremely high, then we tend to avoid them. It's the ones. So we find that DEFRA figures are they feel quite robust. There are lots of different independent sources that align with that. If you're typically using, here's a warning, if you're using a carbon calculator that's produced by the airline industry, it's going to say it's quite low. It's going to say airline emissions are low. Let's stick with the DEFRA figures because they incorporate more of the wider carbon impact of flights, and all travel, which includes radiative forcing. That's a bit of a jargon term, but it basically means emissions at high altitude contribute more to global warming than emissions at ground level. So those are included in the DEFRA figures. But yeah, for us, those are the most robust. And so it's good that you are using those as well in your calculations, Dan.
Dom, I know there was some discussion in the comments about radiative forcing. Was there anything you wanted to expand on there while we
It
have a bit of
was.
time?
Yeah, I didn't necessarily want to go into it too much, but radiating forcing is an interesting one because it's like the contrail effect, the trail that the plane leaves behind that depends where and when you fly as to whether it causes that. And so it's been really hard to calculate them reliably. And that's why there's the aviation industry tries to say, so we just don't use them. And that's why you've got to be careful about using the aviation industry's one for one reason. They'll often not include that radiative forcing at all. And it's, like off the top of my head, I think it's like a third of the impact of a flight or something. Maybe one of you remembers roughly 40% maybe. And there's some, companies trying to work on better estimating these. And it seems like there's certain rules as to when contrails will be more formed. So I think like overnight flights cause them more and stuff. So hopefully like those emissions factors will get more accurate with regards to emissions radiative forcing. But my takeaway message to that chat in the chat box was basically if we avoid flying, then we don't have to worry too much about that emission factor addition.
Exactly, that's the message we're after. It's important for the calculations, but we want to be avoiding flying. That's the message. And more of the behavior change side of things and why why people typically think of flying as the main option. So, do you have any insights on the importance of time versus price and why people make the choices to typically take the flight when there are these other options that we've explored a lot this evening?
I don't know if Sarah's got anything to add there because typically coach travel is the cheapest, but also the slowest. So do you find that from your customers? What's your take there?
It is often longer, but it's not always, and I think that's worth remembering. It's I think I mentioned it earlier. It's coach is the sort of oft forgotten kind of transport method, and it's always worth exploring. I think an example I have is I went to Bordeaux with some friends. They wanted to carry on to San Sebastian, and they looked at flying, much to my dismay. And I said, "Have you looked at Flixbus?" And it was quicker. And it was they were like, "Oh yeah, this is obvious, but it's quicker. It was better price." It obviously is a factor for people, and coach. We're always trying to look at ways to reduce that time. Obviously, we are kind of beholden to things like traffic. If people stopped driving quite so much as well, which is something that also contributes to the climate crisis, then we would reduce those times. But yeah, it's obviously a factor. We try as much as possible to kind of develop network plans that are going to be as efficient as possible time wise. But of course, it's always going to be a factor in terms of how people are choosing to travel.
Yeah, I think in our survey for our campaign we're currently running, the duration wasn't one of the top barriers. It was the cost, number one, and ability to carry equipment and like just routes available, like destination. So yeah, like you just get fantastic views often. Like once you're starting to get to the interesting bits of the journey and taking a book and things, it's not put me off personally. So yeah.
It's also worth saying with coach as compared to train, of course, if there is a road, we can get there by coach. So there is that element of coach being able to sometimes, and not in all cases, but oftentimes being able to do a completely point-to-point journey, which even train can't do. We can't magic train infrastructure into existence. So it's that agility can be a really useful kind of thing to consider. Is actually could coach do that journey where actually I think particularly in the UK, we're talking a lot about London. A lot of people have to go into London to go back out somewhere else. Coach can kind of circumnavigate and actually take off a bit of your time purely by not having to change over trains.
Oh, a really good point in the chat. I didn't even think about, but yeah, that's that same idea with the hidden costs of aviation is the hidden time costs of aviation, and yeah, the amount of time you're hanging around in the airport, need to get there earlier and stuff, can be a lot more than people think. So yeah, I'd rather be sat on another method than faffing around in an airport for sure.
Yeah, definitely using that time to see an interesting view, see a bit of another place you haven't seen, and be able to enjoy the journey a bit more. And as I said, read your book, maybe get a bit of work done on the way as well. on a similar vein to the way we think about the ways we travel. And there was a comment, not quite a question, but a comment right at the start about how the media tends to describe going on holiday as jetting off, which shows how like set in these ways it has been before, and perhaps something that really needs a big rebrand. If anyone has any thoughts to put into that, and the way holidays are typically referred to as that jetting, when in fact incredible holidays can be had, as we've heard from all the examples, that don't require flying in any way.
What would be the coach version of that, Zara?
Yeah, I was just thinking that coaching off doesn't quite work, does it? But we
Yeah,
are.
we'll come up with something.
Yeah, from a brand and a sort of perception, reputation point of view, it's definitely something that certainly is my job, but also the job of other people in the business, and it's something that we are trying to really work on and make sure that coaches at the forefront of people's minds. We've got a pretty cool campaign that's going to be launching later on this year, and I think that's going to definitely give us that boost needed.
Brilliant. If there are any more really urgent questions, I've put in the chat, but I think now it'd be nice to have a couple of minutes for each speaker to a chance to plug what's going on, if there are any campaigns, anything we can do to help spread the word or where people can find you as well. That'd be brilliant. Sarah, you want to go ahead first?
I feel like I've done so much plugging, but I will just give the website, which is flixbus.co.uk, or you can go on the Flixbus app. It's a really affordable way to travel. I really urge you to just at least check us out. I think one thing that I haven't said, which I have been sort of meaning to say and it hasn't quite come up, is that coach travel in and of itself, very sustainable, it's collective, all of the rest of it, but actually also Flixbus is really interested in being sort of at the forefront of zero emission vehicles. So we've trialed that in a number of markets, and it's something that we're really trying to explore. It's a different beast, if you like, from local buses, which are traveling shorter distances, but we are determined to find the sort of, probably not silver bullet solution, but the various solutions that are out there and make them work. So it's on our radar to kind of make coach even more sustainable than it already is.
Brilliant, thank you. And then Dan, if you have anything to plug?
It was great to hear that from Sarah, actually. Often we see the coach coming out as one of the highest, if not the highest, efficiency method of travel when we measure the emissions at Route Zero. If your company is looking to cut emissions from business travel, check out routezero.com, where we deliver very sizable reductions whilst balancing the economics of the way people move around the planet.
Fab, thank you. And over to you, Dom.
So we're currently running a campaign called Clean Miles, and so I'd really ask everyone to come and sign this petition that we're running, and ideally fill in the survey too. It's a petition pushing to make it easier, more affordable, better all round, make the low carbon way of getting somewhere just the easiest and cheapest way to get there. Because we know we don't, like, it's so easy, like so good getting into Europe by without flying, but in some instances there's companies like and governments just not doing all they can to make it easy. So one that's just coming up in the chat is whether they didn't get onward cover when they had a missed connection on the rail, and in Europe they should have addressed that recently with regulation. There's a missing point of this regulation between the UK and the Eurostar, so we're pushing for that on next available train ask, and a bunch of other bits and pieces like what equipment could be carried on different modes of carriage and this sort of thing. So I'll put that in the chat. Actually reminds me, for one last low cost travel tip, is if you're going to go and get a Eurostar, you can get the international CIV London tickets. I don't think we brought this up yet. But if you are going to end up getting into London at a peak time, you can sometimes get different peak hours by getting a ticket to London International CIV, as long as you're getting an onward travel into Europe. They're not the easiest to find, so you might have to go to a ticket office. I think you can't get it on like Trainline, but yeah, keep an eye out for those. That Man in Seat 61 has some info on that CIV ticket if you are doing that into London leg. But a bit of an aside there. Definitely please come and sign our Clean Miles campaign. And yeah, you can read on the website more about the ask than I can summarize in the next 2 seconds that I've got. So thank you all for your support and for listening.
Well, thank you so much. It's great.
for having us on
Last,
Flight Free UK.
brilliant. It's the last nice travel tip to round off the evening then. So big thank you to our speakers. It's been a really interesting discussion. So many comments and thoughts in the chat, so it's clear it's something that is really interesting to hear about. We have
And
at Flight Free UK. Oh, Anna would like to come in.
just to add something there, Maddie. So we always get so many comments and questions at all of our events, which is why once in the season we do an event which is just questions. So most of our events are presenting you, the audience, with information and having some expert speakers. And then once in our series, we just do what are your questions? And it's travel based. So we'll have some travel experts answering your questions. So just to let you know that, and it's always a very lively hour of just looking at what people are asking and directly answering those.
Perfect. Well, that leads on very nicely to what events we've got coming up, because we have a really exciting programme of events coming up throughout 2026, including our question session that Anna's just explained. Our next big event is our big fundraising event, which is happening on the 19th of March. And this is the Night of Flight Free Adventure. It's an evening of fast-paced storytelling, all celebrating big adventures that don't come with a big carbon footprint. And there's tickets available to join us in person in London. And it's also going to be live streamed, so you can join from anywhere from the comfort of your own home. And we also have, yes, lots of online events coming up, similar format to what we've had tonight, but also the question and answer sessions and a couple of in-person events across the UK. If you want to find out more about the events, head to our website. There's a tab at the top, which is straight to our list of events, and you can find all the details and reserve your tickets there. So please do keep in touch. Follow us on social media. We're Flight Free UK everywhere, and that's a great way to keep up to date with what we're up to, find out about our events, and get lots of inspiration for sustainable travel. If you're feeling inspired from this evening to take a flight-free year, please go to our website and sign up to be flight-free throughout 2026. So a big thank you for coming along. It's been a brilliant evening, and thank you to our speakers. We hope to see you again soon at our future events.